In sickness and in health. That's the vow that I took over 35 years ago when I married my husband, Luther. It was the most sacred of promises in my book, and I kept it along with the other part, for richer or poorer. I was the picture-perfect wife, I thought, but really so much more. I not only gave my husband the 3 kids that he wanted and had dinner on the table at the same time every day, surrounded by a spotless house, but I also supported him in everything he did. And I'm not talking metaphorically. When we got married, Luther had a good job, so we got a house together and started our family. But he got fired during my 3rd pregnancy and couldn't find anything else close to his good salary. So I took temporary jobs despite being in my 3rd trimester and having 2 toddlers at home. And I triumphed through it. I was so proud of myself for still keeping a spotless house, having cleaned and well-fed kids as well as homemade food every single day when Luther would return from looking for a new position. I was the kind of person who said that women these days didn't know what it was like to struggle like I did, or what it meant to fight for your family and marriage, and I was extremely humbled much later. My 3rd child was around 6 months old when Luther finally got something permanent, so I had to work a lot at the time. The good part is that we live near his brother and wife, and they helped so I could go to my temporary job, but we couldn't rely on them often. It felt wrong to me. I was supposed to be handling my kids as the wife, and we both breathed a sigh of relief when Luther got a new job and I stopped temping to focus on housewife duties once more. For many years since then, I thought that we were the prime example of what marriage was supposed to look like. Our kids turned into adults and made their own families. Luther and I became empty nesters, but we were good. Until I got diagnosed with breast cancer. The change was almost immediate at that doctor's appointment. Luther went stiff, and I thought that he was scared of what could happen. But his stance was still reserved even when the doctor told us they had caught it early and it was highly treatable. I thought he needed some time too. I needed support, but finding out that I was sick most likely affected me more than anything else. In terms of the treatment, the doctors wanted to see how I reacted to chemo before they recommended surgery. Getting a mastectomy just felt so scary. I decided not to tell my kids for a while. They didn't live close by, and I felt my husband was more than enough support. It felt better to keep things from everyone until I recovered. And bad news should always come with some good news. Luther came to the first appointment and seemed worried and was pretty awesome. I believe that he had accepted the situation and was ready to stand by my side, but he avoided the next 2. At the 3rd appointment, another person getting treatment at the clinic told me something strange. I went online and looked that information up. Many women on forums said the same thing and I couldn't believe it, but my intuition was telling me that it was true. Allegedly, husbands were very likely to leave their wives after a cancer diagnosis. I wanted to deny it. Luther would never do that. But when he missed other appointments and could barely look at me after my vomiting spells at home, I just knew. Women just know. It wasn't long before Luther left me with only a small note saying that he couldn't do this anymore because he hadn't signed up for that. I guess in sickness and in health only counted when he was the sick one. We had been fortunate health-wise for many years, but I had nursed him through colds, fevers, and everything else. He wasn't willing to help me in return after all those years of marriage. I debated telling the kids, but I just couldn't do it, even when the divorce papers arrived way too quickly. I began to think that he was preparing to leave me before my diagnosis. But divorce was only the tip of the iceberg. Luther wanted everything for himself. I went to my lawyer and discovered that our home, which was mostly bought using my money for the down payment, was in his name alone. Everything else was in his name too. I had one separate account, but it had almost nothing. I never knew that I would need to separate my money from my husband. He also wasn't answering my calls, and soon I saw his pictures with another woman on Facebook. I got sicker then, but I had no idea if that was my condition or the betrayal. I tried to call some other people. We had a small group of friends who were originally his buddies. I had become close with their wives. Not one of them answered either, and I got the hint. I was getting cut off completely, and Luther had already moved on, and therefore they were moving on with him. I didn't think of calling his family either. My brother-in-law, Ronald, had always been nice to me, and his wife had a beautiful soul, but I thought that they would take his side. I was alone, and I most definitely didn't want to involve the kids while this situation was getting more complicated. I considered what to do for hours every day. My lawyer told me to fight because no judge in the world would allow this unfairness. He insisted on playing dirty and trying to find evidence of Luther cheating to take everything from him, but I didn't want a huge drawn-out fight either. It felt wrong. Not for him, but for me. I kept thinking that I should be the bigger person and let it go. Except I did find some evidence that Luther had cheated on me before. He had left in a hurry, and since we were still fighting for the division of assets, I was still in our house. I found old hotel receipts and gifts that weren't for me, vacations we didn't take together, the works. All dated after he had gotten that new job that led to his success. All my civility, love, and respect for him went out the door. I gave all those things to the lawyer, and he was sure that he would take him to the cleaners, but I had a different plan in mind. I didn't want to give Luther any excuse to call me the crazy ex-wife. It shouldn't matter, but I wanted to make him look as bad as possible. And the best way for that was to act the most pitiful possible. Because we were countersuing, we had several meetings with the judge, and each time I showed up looking worse and worse. My lawyer would be fighting for my rights, but when I was asked directly, I acted like a saint. I would lower my voice and say, "I want us to resolve things fairly and move on. I don't hold anything against my husband." Even Luther's lawyer was giving him dirty looks. It took a while, but my plan worked. The judge denied almost every demand Luther had, and I was given the house in full, along with part of the savings, retirements, etc. But later, I came to learn from other people that Luther had moved in with his new girlfriend. He made good money even after I won, and therefore he had a trophy girlfriend and was living the high life. I didn't like that either. One afternoon, I went to his office. I had a reason to be there, as some papers needed his signature. I could have done it through our lawyers, but oh well. I dressed and looked just as pitiful as I did in front of the judge. The people in his office knew me, so they would definitely react. As I said, I was the picture-perfect wife. I was always put together. The looks I got when I walked in there were terrible, but they worked for my plan. They all probably knew that we had gotten divorced, but they most likely had no idea I was sick. And by then, I was already wearing a bandana on my head and using a face mask because the doctor had added more rounds of chemo before deciding if we would go through with surgery, and that helped the situation. Luther was furious when he saw me, but I told him that I just wanted to get this over with. He signed, and I left, but not before stopping to say hello to his assistant. She asked how I was doing, and I told her things were rough with my divorce and my sickness. I told her that chemo was more horrible than I had ever imagined, and I saw her face. It confirmed that Luther hadn't said a word. I knew that everyone in the office, hell, maybe even the whole building, would find out soon, and I didn't want to see the consequences. I just wanted as many people as possible to know what kind of person my ex-husband truly was. A while later, I went to my brother-in-law's house with a big box. I had some of Luther's things that I decided that I should take to Ronald. He was more shocked than anyone by my appearance, and he asked, "What's going on, Rose? Are you sick?" And I acted confused and said, "Yes, Ron, I have cancer. Didn't Luther tell you?" He left me because he couldn't handle it. This is the first time I said it in as many words to really anyone. Ron couldn't believe it. His wife, Wendy, was just as outraged, but I told them that I was better off, and I just wanted to give them his things and say goodbye in case I never saw them again. My former brother-in-law got angry at those words and said, "You can see us whenever you want. You're family." And I thanked him for the sentiment. But I also asked him to please not tell anyone because our kids didn't know, and I wanted to get better before I told them anything. Wendy wasn't happy about that. She told me that they should be here with me. What if something happened and they couldn't travel here fast enough? I told her I was doing so much better, and I would tell them soon. Still, she volunteered to help out. At first, Wendy came with me to my last appointments. She listened and comforted me when I cried because the doctor said chemo was doing well and I may not need surgery. At home, she cooked for me and told me more about my ex. When Luther told them about our divorce, he had just said that we had drifted apart, which I already suspected. They hadn't seen him much since he got a new girlfriend, and Wendy didn't want to meet her either. She felt disgusted because he was dating a much younger girl. I didn't care, but it was nice to know after all these months alone and sick that I wasn't alone. I should have known, though, that Wendy wouldn't keep this a secret much longer. That one appearance at Luther's work and Wendy's friends made sure that people knew the kind of person my ex was. She told everyone who would listen. We didn't live in a small town, but we were known in the area. People talk, and they judge. It felt like my small revenge, if you will, was complete. I was finally ready to put things to rest, call my kids, explain everything, apologize, and ask them to visit if they could. I never imagined that I would see Luther before I could call them. It happened after what was supposed to be my last round of chemo for quite some time. Even with the anti-nausea meds, I was still breathing hard, trying not to vomit when my ex came in. He used the kitchen sliding door, which I always kept open, and the first thing out of his mouth to me after all that time and all he had wanted to do and take from me was, "How could you ruin my life, my reputation?" I asked how I ruined his life. I was the sick one, and he was living happily with a trophy girlfriend. He said she had left him, and that certainly wasn't my fault. Luther asked why I just didn't stay quiet and act like the good wife I always was and divorce him without issues, and he said, "No, you had to act like a martyr and get everyone on your side." I didn't say anything, but he saw my face. He saw that I found him ridiculous, and that's when I noticed a side of him that I didn't know existed. After the diagnosis, the cheating, and the divorce, I realized my husband was a complete coward, absolutely dependent on me for everything. I would bet my life that it wasn't just his ruined reputation that drove the trophy girlfriend away. He probably treated her like his maid too, and that's not what young girlies want with some sort of sugar daddy. But I thought being a coward just made him weak and spineless. I didn't think violence was in his nature. Luther exploded when he saw that my lips lifted at his accusations. After hurling the worst things you can say to a person, I saw his hands going straight for my throat, and I thought, this is how it ends. Except Wendy, my savior, opened the door and everything stopped. Behind her were my 3 kids with their spouses and grandkids. She did that. She brought them to me at the best moment possible. I didn't say much about my kids before. I had 2 boys and 1 girl. My eldest, Anthony, saw his father's hands in the air and understood the implications right away. Luther had touched me, so Anthony and his brother, Walter, grabbed and threw him out of the house. The women and the kids came inside to stay safe and protect me, and I told them I was fine except I had to run to the bathroom for a while. I was sure that vomiting had more to do with what could have happened than my treatment. My ex-husband went away, and everyone around us cut contact with him for good. I got some grief from my kids about keeping basically almost a year of my life a secret from them, but I was sick, so they couldn't do much. When the doctor officially told me that I was in remission, my daughter, Anna, demanded that I move in with her, and I did. It was just better to be closer to them. I've been happier in these past years than I ever was being married. I no longer judge women or anyone who doesn't want to settle down. Marriage is not for everyone. Make your life what you will and make sure to surround yourself with people that you love and trust. It's often hard to know what that'll be, but you need them. Telling Ronald and Wendy the truth was the best thing I did at that time, and I'll forever be grateful for her spilling the beans to my kids, as it seemed, to save my life.